So here we are in chapter 2, which talks about some ethical dilemmas of environmental policies and economics. This gets into your question in your course assignment number 1, which talks about the Hetchy Valley, which drains Yosemite National Park. Years ago, it looked something like this, and now it looks like this because it's been completely kind of transformed into a reservoir. Here's John Muir and Teddy Roosevelt. John Muir was a huge environmentalist which fought for national parks, and Teddy Roosevelt was someone he convinced to establish the national park system. So two very important men in our sustainability of our country. Here's a link to the Hetchy Valley that you'll need to watch for your course assignment number 2. Harrison Ford narrates it, a much younger Harrison Ford, but it's a great video that talks about one of the issues and the ethics and dilemmas and policies that go behind any sort of environmental issue. I'll let you guys look through the changing views of humans and nature over time. The Industrial Revolution is really where when we started this new technology and new scientific understanding. We got the invention of the steam engines. We were using a lot more environmental resources such as coal. And this is where the idea of a conservationist and a preservationist view came into being. A preservationist view is that parks and public land should preserve wild nature in completely a pristine state. And a conservationist view is where it should be used and managed sustainably to provide the greatest benefit to the greatest number of people. So John Muir would have been an example of a preservationist, and Gifford Pinchot, which was the head of the U.S. Forest Service, would be an example of a conservationist, where he believed in using the land, managing it, so that most people could benefit from it. In the modern era, here's where we have so many environmental trends, debates, warnings, completely dominating our media. Here's an example of a biodiversity advocate who wrote several great books. Doing the right thing, these are our main ethical traditions, whether they're virtue ethics, consequence-based ethics, or duty-based ethics, and you should know that those three and what they mean. You've probably seen things like this. This was a demonstration to try to stop the Keystone Pipeline, which went through Canada down the central United States during the Obama administration. Environmental ethics can differ, whether it's if people and things have intrinsic value or instrumental value. And intrinsic value means that people, organisms, and objects are valued in and of themselves, versus instrumental value is giving value to things as a means to something else. So if I were to give you this picture, I would ask you what things in this picture have intrinsic value, mean they're valued in and of themselves. We might say the panda bear and the spider are, because they're moving and living, but these mushrooms and the moss growing on the tree, some might say, well, that has intrinsic value too, because it's also living and breathing. So this is the idea of where some policies and environmental issues can get into heated debates, because it's assigning value to what sort of things in the environment. Anthropocentric gives intrinsic value to humans only. Biocentric gives intrinsic value to all living things. And ecocentric ethics gives intrinsic value to all communities and ecosystems, which would include even like a rotting log. And this is where a deep ecology movement stems from. This is an activity I'll let you guys do on your own. This is another kind of discussion question you can think on your own: if big game hunting should be banned in Africa. The proponents for big game hunting says it provides a lot of revenue to these third world developing countries. Opponents to big game hunting obviously are because you're getting rid of endangered species for pure game or sport. Videos on proponents for big game hunting, and then an opponent for big game hunting. And 1 second here. All right. Let's take a look at ecofeminism, which fosters feminine concerns. In third world countries, women suffer disproportionately from human destruction of the environment. Women are normally the ones who are out gathering the water So if water supplies decrease in a third world country, it's really the women who suffer because they have to travel further to try to get water. Environmental justice seeks to protect natural resources for all, regardless of their race, gender, economic status. This is a look at a lower middle class community in the South, which they were trying to fight for the elimination of a landfill that was going to be put in their neighborhood. And they were saying, well, you're not going to put a landfill in the rich upper class neighborhood. You shouldn't put a landfill in our neighborhood. And they actually ended up winning, which was great to see. Economic systems, a subsistence economy is a society that meets its needs without gaining any wealth, and a market economy talks about production and consumption that take place in markets guided by prices. So here's a look at a subsistence economy where you would probably trade or barter for goods and services. A planned economy is where the government regulates the price of goods and services and the level of production. Supply and demand is the price increases when the supply is low. I'll let you guys read through some of this, kind of the marketplace. This is a look at North Korea, where the government regulates everything, but on the black market and on the streets, this woman still tries to find a way to make some extra money. Here's a great chart about supply and demand. You should understand what that means. Economic value is the price consumers will pay, and usually the satisfaction benefit will determine, or the availability of abundance of water has to do with the satisfaction benefit of it as well. So those two will influence each other. Market complications, I'll have you look at how free markets may deplete resources. External costs can cause problem to humans. Other ways that the environment gets involved in the marketplace, there can be unknown costs and benefit. Limited resources can drive the cost up. Smoking was once said that it was good for you. This is John Wayne telling you to smoke cigarettes. So obviously things have completely changed over the years, including how we view our environment. Economic valuation is a price tag for nature. What's the cost of an ecosystem? You should look at these different values and how we can give value to our ecosystems. For example, you might say, wow, this house looks beautiful. It's probably worth a ton of money, but what if I told you it was right next to a sewer, a landfill, water treatment center, and it smelled? How would that affect the value of then this ecosystem? Ecological valuation is usually how we value ecosystems is we usually ask ourselves, what will it cost us if we lost it? So for example, deforestation may lead to the cost of flooding, which could result in tons of money being lost through tree loss. We can also look at coffee production without pollination rates and without surrounding forests giving rise to the insects that can increase pollination. That could increase the loss of the surrounding forest, could then equal about $60,000 in loss of the crop production per year. So that's an example of calculating the ecological value. Here's a look at percent of Earth's area and the percent of total value of ecosystem services. You can see here that the open ocean gives a lot of us of the total value of our ecosystem services. Wetlands, grasslands do. So it's just looking at the different ecosystems on planet Earth and which ones give us the most value. I'll let you guys read about this guy. Bees are one of the most important pollinators, which again had to do with that loss of coffee bean production when we lost the forests that give habitats for bees. GDP is the gross domestic product, and this is a main one, how we measure the wealth of nations. This is the value of goods and services produced divided by the population. This is a look at deforestation in South America. These are types of timber, trees that are worth a lot of money. So on the black market, people will deforest these forests and then sell the wood for high prices. So environmental policy, deciding and acting, who sets these policies, who guides them, how do we even get to the steps in government that they take to develop and revise these policies? It's a complicated process. You can look at kind of the process here. You have to formulate the policy, adopt it, implement it, and then assess it. And then you go through this cycle over and over again. There's regulatory mandates, incentives. I'll let you guys read through a lot of this on your own. There's 8 issues of policy decision framework, and it can be pretty complex, and deciding who has the final say is also confusing as well. So I'll let you guys read through more of this governmental policy on your own. You should be familiar with the 3 branches of our government and what role that they each have on making these policies. The Constitution and environmental policy. There are several environmental laws: sovereignty, customary international laws, conventional laws, and judicial international laws that you should be familiar with as well. International institutions, the big one is the United Nations. 54 nations are involved in that, and that one's probably the most important and the biggest. And this is a look at an example of a United Nations meeting. The number of non-governmental organizations has risen greatly over the years, and these are organizations that are nonprofit that help with some of these environmental issues. And it's great that the UN recognizes NGOs and helps support them. Here are some solutions and an example of those solutions. An agent of change, the end of the chapter always gives you just a great example of someone in their community who tried to be an agent of change to reduce plastic waste in this example, or to try to implement some sort of environmental change in their community. So I'll close most chapters with an example of that to try to get you fired up to maybe be an agent of change in your own community. That's the end of chapter 2. Thanks for listening.